And with that, welcome you inside this midweek edition of Big Ten Today, presented by Old National Bank. I'm Rick Pizzo. We get a check at some of the Big Ten's dark horses heading into 2024. Plus, how much pressure is Lincoln Riley on at USC? All those topics and much more as we dive into this week's edition of Big Ten Today. But first, want to introduce you to a new member of our Big Ten team as we say hello via the magic of cyber television to Ross Dellenger. Ross is familiar to anyone who has read anything about college football over the past decade and a half, 2 decades. He's been a beat writer for multiple teams, worked for Sports Illustrated, Yahoo Sports now as well. Ross, welcome in, and what a phenomenal time to be starting with us here at the Big Ten Network in a year setting up to be like none other in the history of the Big Ten.
Well, it's great to be on. It's great to be a new member. I can add it to the resume, Big Ten Network, and like you said, an incredible year to be starting this, right? It may be the most anticipated college football season in recent history. Expanded playoff, new conference memberships, right? All this realignment, and I'm just happy to be on with you guys.
And we will dive into the new college football playoff, all the restructuring, what it means not just in the Big Ten, but for college football as a whole. But we begin, as we often do, with today's big story, taking a look at the big-time question so many teams have at quarterback this season. A year after the position was as good as we've potentially ever seen, only 4 starters are back, and that includes Cade McNamara. You'll find out in a little bit why McNamara may not be the starter when Iowa opens its season in 2024. Do all the math. You'll know that 14 teams will open their respective seasons with new starting quarterbacks. And with that in mind, change brings with it, Ross, a lot of uncertainty, but it brings with it an opportunity for us to see new faces emerge. And I don't think there's anywhere where attention will be more focused on a new young quarterback than in Lincoln, Nebraska, with Dylan Raiola. He comes in with all the hype. We've seen him through the course of spring. He is now installed as the likely starter as we get into fall camp. What intrigues you the most about what we could see from this young guy in Lincoln?
Well, we all remember the spring game, right? Everybody got a good look at this 5-star prospect rated by many of the top quarterback out of this past class, and he looked like it, right? I know it's just a spring game, right? But 16 for 22, I think he went over 230 yards passing. Showed just that lightning quick release, Rick, and looked effortlessly throwing the football. I was talking to some folks at Nebraska actually yesterday. Buzz out of camp on him. It's all the cliches, right? Maturity beyond his years, right? Patient in the pocket, things you don't necessarily often see from young players. He seems to be showing, at least in camp and at least in the spring game. It's another another step up when you actually face real competition, but he's looked the part. And then, Coach Matt Rule, of course, trying his best, right, to tamp down the hype and expectations. Tough to do that, though, with such a talent.
And also tough to do that when you look at a freshman quarterback, Ross, and no matter how good you are, as a freshman, that quarterback is going to make mistakes. So I think it's going to be interesting for us to watch, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, how Matt Rule and the rest of that offensive staff balances the need to be more explosive in the pass game with the understanding that if you ask Raiola to do that, that means they're going to make more mistakes. And it's mistakes that's really kept Nebraska out of the postseason the last couple of years.
That's right. Turnovers specifically, right? I think Nebraska was dead last in the Big Ten and maybe among power conference programs in turnover margin last year, -17. That's got to get better. When you have a freshman quarterback, you have turnovers, right? You tend to have a lot of turnovers. But I think what any freshman, any rookie quarterback has to do is once you make that mistake, right, is get past it and move on to the next play. You hear coaches often say, next play, we're moving on. And that's what it's hard sometimes for, I think, young players to do that. Can Dylan Raiola do that? He's shown, like I said, in fall camp, that maturity. Maybe he can kind of move past that mistake and not make too many of them. Nebraska does not need to be -17 in the turnover margin if they're going to get back to postseason and maybe championship form this year.
All right, from a young guy to a familiar face in a new place, that being Dylan Gabriel, lit things up at Oklahoma. You lose Bo Nix at Oregon, and everybody thinks, well, maybe there's a little bit of a fall off. Insert Dylan Gabriel, and it's not as if he comes in with an empty cupboard. The defense is lights out. And Ross, you have Jordan James in the backfield. You have Ted Johnson on the outside. I mean, this seems to be setting up for a year where Gabriel could come in and put up absolutely eye-popping numbers.
For sure. Another Dylan, and no pressure, right? As you mentioned, Bo Nix, just a Heisman finalist and a guy who set the NCAA passing record for completion percentage last year is who he'll be replacing. I don't know that any quarterback in the country returning has as much experience as this guy, Dylan Gabriel. 125 touchdowns in just 26 picks. Third school, right? I mean, he's got a ton of starts under his belt, and like you said, he's got weapons. He's got certainly a good defense on the other side. Dan Lanning, the coach, has recruited incredibly well there in Oregon. They've really invested in the NIL program there when it comes to recruiting. But he does, Oregon did lose their top running back, I think their top receiver, but they've got weapons, right? Tez Johnson, former Troy transfer, had 86 catches last year. Would expect him to kind of step up. But hey, Rick, don't overlook to the backup, right? He's got a good backup behind him. Dante Moore from UCLA started a few games for Chip Kelly. Really talented prospect as well. A good guy to learn behind for him is, of course, Dylan Gabriel with so much experience.
Yeah, and I think there's no question. It's always good to have a backup. Dan Lanning doesn't want more on the field this year unless it's in mop-up duty late in games when Oregon has a significant lead. Another veteran transfer, Will Howard, comes from Kansas State to Ohio State. Listen, Howard was remarkably productive, but Ross, when you look at the roster that Ohio State has around him, whether it's Henderson and Judkins in the backfield, a ludicrously loaded outside with the wide receivers, and a defense filled with guys that could have been NFL draft picks last year, I'm thinking that Howard, and I hate to use the term game manager, but I'm thinking that as long as he stays within the script, this is an offense that is going to potentially rewrite record books inside the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a ton of hype right around Ohio State for all the reasons you just mentioned. But there is one kind of question mark, right? And it is the quarterback position. They had all these guys return on defense, right? They've got a defense that is improved tremendously from a few years ago, and they've got incredible talent from the transfer portal on offense, all these weapons around the quarterback. But the quarterback position is the question. And can Will Howard impress like he did at Kansas State? Took Kansas State 2 years ago to the Big 12 title. Right? People kind of forget that they beat TCU, who ended up going on and playing for the national championship and beating Michigan in the route there. So he's got skills. He can do damage with his feet as well, and that obviously opens up a lane for any offensive coordinator, especially one as innovative and as creative as Chip Kelly. I'm not sure any starting QB, kind of has the dual kind of threat ability and the experience combo as we've seen from Will. But can he do it, right? So much pressure. We talk about the pressure on Ryan Day because of all these things, right? These returning players and just the talent and how much money they've invested in the roster. And there's a lot of pressure on Will Howard too. Right. I saw a headline recently. Will Howard must answer his doubters in 2024. So season's not even here, and the pressure is on for Will.
That is every year in Columbus. Ask Ryan Day. Ask any Ohio State coach that's ever been there before. The expectations are beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, and get to the national championship game. For the second straight year, Luke Fickell has gone to the portal and gotten a veteran quarterback. It was Tanner Mordecai. Now it's Tyler Van Dyke. What do we know about Van Dyke and how he may fit into this system that last year I don't think ever found its true identity? Was it a run first, then go to the air, or set up the run with the pass game? How does he fit into that style in 2024?
Yeah, we saw Van Dyke 3 years at Miami, right? We've got a lot to watch there. There's a lot of games there, and the games look different from year one to year 2 and 3. And I don't know what it was, right? But we didn't see the Tyler Van Dyke in year 2 and 3 that we saw originally in year 1. It was kind of a roller coaster at Miami, and you wonder when that Van Dyke will come back, the one we saw in his first season when he kind of broke out there. Maybe it's under Phil Longo as offensive coordinator there at Wisconsin. Maybe it's his system. Maybe the fresh start will be something. But think about the stats. Year 1, I believe Van Dyke threw 25 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. The next 2 years, 26 touchdowns, 13 picks. Poor decision, sporadic moments. It was very odd, but he does have an advantage. I saw recently Luke Fickell called the most improved unit on Wisconsin's team is that offensive line. And obviously incredibly important for a quarterback, especially a new quarterback, to be behind an improved and experienced offensive line. They returned 3 starters there at Wisconsin, more than 100 career starts. So very important. So hopefully the fresh start, offensive line, all that stuff will lead to the Van Dyke that everybody saw in 2021.
Let's finish in East Lansing. Aiden Childs, not a familiar name to Spartan fans, but he certainly is to the new coach, Jonathan Smith, as they both come from Oregon State. He's a guy that seems to have a ton of potential, and obviously Smith is a guy who has shown his offensive acumen in what wasn't the easiest of situations up in Corvallis. Now with more resources, a heavy trip into the transfer portal in the offseason. What are you expecting from Aiden Childs?
Yeah, you said it right. All the potential in the world. You even hear from over the summer some NFL scouts point to him as a guy that they are watching, who's a top 15 ranked quarterback out of high school from California, signed with Oregon State, and played in spots last year for the Beavers. We didn't get to see him for long stretches, right? But played in spots and played well. 70% of his passes completed, 4 TDs, and no picks. He's still on the honeymoon of no interceptions. He seems like, Rick, that he's a inviting guy. He's kind of bonded with the team down there. We've read some things about comments from the players about how he's fit in. But there's no easy road here for Sparty, right? They get Ohio State, Oregon, in Michigan. But what really helps is he's used to the system, right? He's played in the system last year under Jonathan Smith at Oregon State. He knows the terminology. So that's going to always help, especially with that tough schedule.
Aiden Childs should be one of the more fascinating stories under center this season, though there are so many to cover. As I said at the start of the show, in a season that will truly be like none other in the history of the Big Ten and the history of college football. Ross just getting his history started. He's not going anywhere. He'll be with us after the break. Still to come here on Big Ten Today as well. Hawkeye insider Scott Dochterman on what's shaping up to be a legit QB competition in Iowa City. Plus, our training camp tour visiting the City of Angels for the latest on USC Trojan football. A season preview is on the way right after this.